welcome back to the 411 on Wrestling Podcast. I am your host, Blake Lovell, and with me today is Brandon Thurston from Wrestlenomics. If you're someone that enjoys the business side of professional wrestling, you've no doubt heard of Brandon's work over there at Wrestlenomics.com, and we'll talk a little bit more about his really just fantastic Patreon he also has with some great insight on there a little bit later on. But Brandon, thanks for joining me. And as you and I joked about before we started, we scheduled this before Tuesday here as we're recording, and turns out we actually had some news come out that will probably fit quite well into our discussion.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It sounds like there's upwards of 35 employees, I've been told, who have been laid off. The Advanced Media Group, which is a division, which is a department in WWE, is being merged with the TV department. Kevin Dunn always wins. He's going to head them both, it sounds like. And the W Studios department as well. Looks like there's a lot of layoffs happening there, too.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about this, and obviously, I'm sure we'll have more information. There'll be more details that come out, but I mean, on some of this, they had mentioned, I guess, some of these layoffs, certainly as you said, coming from the Advanced Media Group, and then there are people who have worked on either WWE.com, YouTube, editorial, production, that kind of stuff. Do you look at this and say, well, the move to Peacock obviously affects the WWE network, all that kind of stuff. I guess what do you kind of take away from this just based on what we know now? Like we said, I'm sure there's so much more we'll find out about this, but just maybe how this whole thing is unfolded here with some of these layoffs in these specific departments there.
Yeah, well, I'm guessing that they thought that they had a lot of redundancies, and maybe with the network being the U.S. Rights to the network anyway, being sold to Peacock, maybe NBC Universal is going to take over some of the responsibilities that they had.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's I guess they just felt that there were a lot of redundancies, and they didn't need to have an Advanced Media Group and a television department separately.
Yeah, and obviously there's been a lot reported about you guys having on Wrestlenomics. There's a lot of reports out there just about the specifics on who all have been let go. Executive vice presidents of the Advanced Media Group. You talked about sort of the merging. Kevin Dunn going to be overseeing a lot of that. I know one of the things reported was that there would be a meeting on Wednesday, that would seemingly at least go into some of the reasoning behind it, I'm sure. And one of the things, I know this is not necessarily business related, but it does affect the WWE product, and that was Adnan Virk, who had recently, I guess it's less than a month now, or maybe a month or so, however long it's been, but he had been doing his work with MLB Network, and of course had been at ESPN and such in the past, but that was another interesting one. Like we said, it's a different circumstance, I assume, but still, to have your lead commentator that you basically just introduced after WrestleMania, that's another interesting one.
Right. It sounded like a Nick Khan connection. Adnan Virk is a former client of Nick Khan. Nick Khan is the chief revenue officer and president as of August of last year. He's the one who's making all the big TV deals for WWE even before he came to work for WWE last year. Yeah, Adnan Virk is gone. Yeah, maybe it's related to budgeting that he's gone today, as well as a number of W employees. But yeah, just to go back to the Advanced Media Group. So the biggest layoff here looks to be J.R. Donlin, who's an executive vice president, as well as James Rosenstock, who's another executive vice president. So J.R. Donlin was heading the Advanced Media Group. Since that group is being merged into television under Kevin Dunn, I guess he's no longer needed, or can probably find a similar job elsewhere. And James Rosenstock, who's the head of international TV, also an executive vice president, he is out as well. So that's what I know right now. But I guess, like you kind of said, I think we'll learn more about what exactly is happening with W Studios. I don't know if anybody else is reporting this, but I'm hearing that there's most of the W Studios team is being let go.
Yeah.
And maybe I'll have a follow-up on that if I can confirm some details.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll check back with you on that. Hopefully, like I said, we can add that in for our notes, of our show notes. And of course, we'll have anything over at WarnerMedia.com that Brandon finds out there. But I guess, Brandon, the next logical step is to talk about another piece of certainly big news surrounding WWE. They announced their return to live touring, which will start on July 16th. It'll be part of that 25 city tour with them getting back to having fans in attendance. And obviously, we'll talk about AEW in a second and kind of the route they've gone. But initial thoughts on that? I mean, I think that we had, everyone had kind of known this was coming, and I know SummerSlam had kind of been the big talking point for a while there. But I think as you saw, things sort of maybe speed up a little bit in terms of their thinking on when they could get back out there. But just any big takeaways from you once they made that announcement?
So they've got 3 dates announced, all in Texas. So it's the Friday SmackDown, Sunday Money in the Bank, and Monday Raw. Uh, those tickets, at least 2 of the 3 of those events, went on sale today in pre-sale, and they look to have done well. There's a good Twitter account that actually is at AEW Ticket Info, but they're covering the Ticketmaster activity on the W events as well. And those look to be selling. It's hard to tell what exactly is a sold seat and what is just an unavailable seat, but there isn't a ton of availability right now for at least the Money in the Bank, and I think it's the Raw taping. The thing about the timing too is this is July 16th. I think is the first date back. That's the Friday, the SmackDown. So it's the middle of July. The timing on the Q2 earnings report will be either late July or early August. So just after those events happen. So it's something that they'll be able to tell a story to investors and to analysts about on the earnings call. If these events sell out or come close to selling out and do well, WWE can tell a story about how all of this pent up demand that people have been talking about really since pretty early on in COVID.
Yeah.
People have been talking about the pent up demand that ticket buyers will have whenever live events really return to normal. So that's something that WWE can put over as, they're really the beneficiaries of that among other companies.
That has to be, I'm sure that was a fascinating discussion. I'm sure, not just for WWE, but I'm sure AEW has gone through this and many other companies have and will continue probably to go through this. But that has to be sort of a fascinating thought of, okay, we know, or at least we can project like what we think ticket sales are going to look like and that type of thing. But I guess, you never really know, I guess, and once until they're actually on sale, and just kind of knowing the climate, of course, of everything around the world, specifically in the United States. I think that is an interesting element. It's just to kind of see, as you said, you can kind of look at some of the pre-sales and such thus far, but that had to be something that, that many people had their eyes on, knowing that, hey, we at least think it's going in this direction, but I guess you never really know until people are actually putting the money towards it to buy the tickets.
Yeah, I think WrestleMania they were disappointed in. They haven't said so, but that's
Yeah.
my impression that WrestleMania ticket sales did not go as well as they had hoped. It certainly was not a fast sellout, and I have the report. I think I haven't looked at it in a bit, but I think it's just under 20,000 tickets sold for each day. So they had at least, I think they had about 25,000. That's what they said was the capacity for each day. And you think about that at the time, that was early April, and there weren't nearly as many people vaccinated as there are now. And I think the more people get vaccinated, the more people are going to be comfortable going to, large public gatherings. And then these are full capacity events. These are not socially distanced events. You look at the seating charts, it looks like full 10,000 some odd capacity arenas.
Yeah, well, it should be, as we saw at WrestleMania, as you said, it should be an interesting atmosphere, certainly for that. July 16th, and I know they've announced a couple of, returns. I think they mentioned Edge and Sasha Banks. I think we're returning for that first one there, whatever that specific show was. But I know one of the other things that's been brought up, and you guys discussed this. I listened to it on your recent edition of WrestleNomics Radio, was about everyone started asking the question, because this is such a big part of WWE's financials when it comes to the deal with Saudi Arabia and the events they hold there. Obviously, they get a lot of money out of holding those events, and I know one of the things you mentioned on there was that's going to be a topic that's discussed, but there's probably still a lot of unknowns with that, just in terms of the travel limitations, what restrictions are still in place, and all of that. So I guess that's probably one of those that's still in wait and see mode in terms of maybe what their plans are. I know, it had been reported, I can't remember exact timeline, but I know there had been, reports out there suggesting that certainly they wanted to potentially try to make that happen again, given the financial investment there and what could be at stake. But that is something I feel like probably still wait and see, just based on all the limitations and such. So
Yeah, according to an article from the Associated Press on May 17th, uh, Saudi Arabia is not allowing foreigners, at least from the U.S., into the country at this point. Maybe that'll change at some time before the end of the year. I would predict that they would do at least one this year, and I wouldn't even be surprised if they did more than one before the end of the year.
yeah,
They've already missed out on two. They did one in early 2020, February 27th, 2020 is the last time they went to Saudi Arabia for a large-scale international event. On the earnings calls, they never say Saudi Arabia. It's a large-scale international event. Uh, and by the way, these are worth $50 to $55 million every time they go. To put that in some perspective, they're supposed to do two every year, so that comes to about $100 million, maybe $110 million every year. That's about 10% of their overall revenue. They're generating just under $1 billion in revenue per year. So that's how big of a piece it is to their business. It's about 10% of their business. And it's probably highly profitable too. Even though these are big and expensive events that they bring in special stars for and things like that. But yeah, they have some events to make up, and Vince has said that they will just tack the missed events onto the end of the deal. So maybe it's a deal that ends up going longer than it's originally supposed to. Maybe they jam in 3 events in a year on some of these years though. But yeah, I would expect that the stock market. And I think I don't know if their current financial projections include or assume a Saudi event, but I would think that most people are expecting probably one event before the end of the year. But again, it's really dependent on whether the Saudi government is going to allow people from the U.S. into the country, or whether they'll even, who knows, make some exception for WWE.
yeah, like you said, I know there is a lot financially they would certainly like to make that happen, as you said, just given the amount of money they get from that event. And I know that a lot of people have sort of talked about, just the logistics and everything involved with that. But it will be interesting to see kind of how that unfolds. I mean, I guess, when you look at it overall, and I know this is a very broad question because, as we've all said, it's felt like this past year or so has, felt like 5 years. But as you look back on WWE specifically, in terms of how they've navigated this past year, obviously we're still in the pandemic era, just based on, I mean, we've seen all the recent stuff with New Japan and everything over there and kind of what they've had to deal with, and just in many other places around the world. But has there anything specifically, I guess, business wise? I mean, I know that the Nick Khan has sort of been the one I think that's really stood out, as you said, on some of the earnings calls and such, in terms of just, it feels like he is really putting his touch on a lot of different things, and especially over the past year or so, kind of when we've seen him step in. But is there anything specifically that you kind of look at and say, okay, WWE is getting back to live touring, we can take away this maybe from how they try to do different things, or some particular items on the business aspect just from this past year?
Well, I think what we've seen in the time of the pandemic is just how much the wrestling business has been turned on its head to what it was in a prior era, where the wrestling business was all about getting on TV and promoting tickets or pay-per-views. It's become the opposite of that, where the TV is the thing that generates the biggest piece of revenue.
Yeah.
And in WWE's case, in the last few years before the pandemic, their live event business was not profitable in many quarters. Really, the WrestleMania quarter was the only quarter that was sure to be profitable. So it's become a media business. You could think of it as, it's become a business that is far more about selling video than it is about selling tickets. Video in various forms, mostly in the form of live TV. That's the most valuable piece, but also in the W Network. And we know the W Network was just, the U.S. rights were sold to Peacock for $200 million per year on an average annual basis. But in the case of New Japan, the media the market for live sports rights is not nearly as strong in Japan as it is in the U.S.
Right.
So New Japan does not have these enormous guaranteed TV rights fees. They're still making the majority, I think the slim majority of their revenue from ticket sales still. So that's why we've seen this, they've canceled or postponed the events, and as they were sending the foreigners home, they reversed their decision and decided, no, the events are back on, because they really need to run events in order to keep themselves afloat and to continue to have cash flow. So that's what's going on there. And I don't know, as far as Nick Khan, I think Nick Khan his background is a talent agent. He's represented a number of sports personalities and sports announcer and commentator and radio personalities, as well as he's done things like represent WWE in its TV rights negotiations in 2018, the current deals that they're getting right now for Raw and SmackDown, which they more than tripled their rights with Nick Khan helping them negotiate. But I think we're seeing too. So Nick Khan, I think, is especially suited to add to WWE in this time where so much of their financial future is bound to the value of their live sports rights. Also, I think we're seeing maybe the over application of his background in terms of getting Adnan Virk a position as the commentator on Raw. That clearly didn't work out.
Yeah.
This talent management group that they put together after they made everybody get off of Twitch and Cameo, that was put together and then disbanded about a month later. So we're seeing some things like that. I think we're seeing reportedly the zombie lumberjack match was a result of a advertising deal to promote the Army of the Dead. I think it is the Batista movie. So there's in some ways you can see how his background is being over applied, and I think this often happens, maybe in business generally. But I think this happened with the previous management, George Barris and Michelle Wilson, who were co-presidents until January 2020. I think they were over-applying a tech company vision onto WWE in many ways, in terms of trying to run their own streaming service and trying to monetize data and sell their data to third parties, which is not as valuable as they had hoped. So that's what I think is happening.
Yeah, and I know people have talked about, ratings too, certainly during viewership during this era, and I know it's probably hard to sort of correlate kind of the anticipation moving forward or what the expectations are. Is there anything that stands out to you just based on, I mean, again, I know it's a pretty broad question in terms of where Raw is at. I mean, we've talked about Raw a lot. Obviously, it's the one that the people seemingly really look at each week, and the viewership is obviously not what it used to be. NXT, I know there've been lots of discussions on that since they moved from Wednesdays to Tuesdays, and then SmackDown still on Fox. And certainly, again, we know all the money that's coming in from all those deals, and how that is kind of pushing WWE forward from a business standpoint. But are there any trends in particular that you look at now? And again, we don't know if anything changes significantly just based on having crowds back and such. I mean, again, we're sort of in an unprecedented situation, but is there anything that stands out, maybe ratings wise, on any of those flagship shows at this point?
I think Raw and SmackDown have been holding up pretty well in the ratings in the last 4 months or so. I would have expected them to slip a little bit more than they did. May, it looks like they're slipping somewhat, but that happens every May, so it's not exceeding my expectations in terms of the viewership loss right now. Viewership over time, of course, is down greatly from where it's been years ago. Largely, that's in line with TV trends overall. Raw and SmackDown are still among the most viewed programs on TV, and as long as they are still among the most viewed programs on TV, Raw and SmackDown will probably maintain the kind of value that they have now. Even if the cable bundle comes apart, I think live sports will continue to have a great deal of value as long as the Raw and SmackDown audience is among the largest audiences of any given form of live entertainment that people want to watch as it happens. I think there will always be a way to highly monetize events like that going forward. The thing is, though, now, I don't know if you heard about this, but Showbuzz Daily, which is the website that
Yes.
everyone relied on for TV ratings, they posted the top 150 cable originals every day, and they posted prime time for broadcast networks as well. That's no longer being updated. I'm working under the presumption that that's never going to be updated again, and we need to find new sources for our TV viewership. So it's going to be more difficult than before to follow what's happening with viewership and what's happening with various demographics. But we're going to do our best. But yeah, it's we will have less granularity. I'm sure we will still have at least total viewership. Hopefully, we'll still be able to get a few other demos too. But yeah, and I think AEW's they're doing all right in their viewership too. They got preemptions coming up, which will probably be challenging. But I think AEW's done considerably well in their viewership, and there's a good argument that AEW is very undervalued in its current deal, which isn't going to expire until December 2023, and it's probably going to be extended for an option through December 2024. But I think AEW, whenever they do renegotiate, is going to be due for maybe doubling their TV rights fees, but that's far future.
Well, you mentioned one product placement, I guess, on AEW Dynamite and Showbuzz Daily has struggled since.
Yes.
So
that is the last that Showbuzz Daily cable that you saw on AEW Dynamite a couple Wednesdays ago. That was the historic last table that Showbuzz Daily ever posted.
Well,
I really wonder what the story is. They say they have tech issues. I wonder if they just lost their source, though.
let's hope that isn't a Dark Side of the Ring episode at some point. But if there is anything we've learned from that, Brandon, we want you to get WrestleNomics all the pub you can. But if you put it on AEW Dynamite, it appears that bad things could happen. So hesitate in that situation. But you mentioned AEW. Certainly, the move from TNT to TBS and next year has been a big talking point. That was among, I guess, that was last week or the week before now. It's just a massive week for news. And some of the things you pointed out, certainly when you look at the 18 to 49 demo, which is the one we always talk about as the key demo, I mean, TNT is the leader there in terms of, you're making a switch from TNT to TBS, a little bit different there in terms of the actual demographic. But something else you also noted that I thought was pretty interesting was it's fairly even, but I guess the Nielsen estimates were that TBS is still, in slightly more homes than TNT, which again, I know those aren't exactly specific numbers. That's sort of based on estimates and such. But I guess, overall, your thoughts on that. I mean, one of the things that I feel like we've always noted is AEW's audience has done a pretty good job of sort of following them where they go, and I know sort of the bouncing around, as you said, in the coming weeks here, due to the NBA playoffs, that'll kind of tell even more of a story and give us more of a reference point on those, over time since they've started and had to made some of these moves. But with TNT having the NBA, they're going to add NHL here seemingly. But I guess if you look at it overall, it's a move, but it's probably going to be one where I feel like AEW's sort of in terms of live sports and such, they're going to kind of be the driving force, it seems like, on TBS.
Yeah, it seems like TNT is going to become almost a sports network. They're going to have NBA and the NHL by the end of the year, I guess, in the new season for the NHL. But yeah, as you mentioned, TBS is in slightly more homes than TNT. Really, TNT, TBS, and USA are all in roughly the same number of homes. Really, TBS is in slightly more homes than USA and TNT. But it's all. I don't think it's probably less than 1% difference. Although I've heard that Tony Khan immediately made this one of his talking points as soon as he read it off my Twitter. But yeah, to put TNT in maybe a few 100,000 fewer homes, but TNT is a stronger network. TNT does, largely driven by the NBA games, does better in P18 to 49, which is what we keep being hit over the head with by people at AEW, that's all they care about is the P18 to 49. They don't care about the total viewership. So I take their word for it. But TNT performs better in that area by a pretty considerable margin compared to TBS. So it's not a great thing for AEW that they're moving their flagship show from TNT to TBS. That said, it'll probably be okay. They're not moving from one network to an unrelated network. They're moving from one network to another within the Turner family, and I'm sure it'll be promoted hard. It's not going to be like, I think there was in one of the Raw moves either to or from Viacom. I think they were censored when they were trying to promote their new TV home. But anyway, I think they'll be okay. I think wrestling fans are good at figuring out where to watch their wrestling, and I'm sure the first show on TBS, the first Dynamite on TBS, will be heavily promoted. Maybe we'll have a really big card to get people to make sure that they get in the habit of tuning into TBS on Wednesday night for AEW. And I think the transfer will be okay. It usually is in the case of wrestling, and there's no reason to think it won't be well promoted. So I think they'll be fine. Rampage is coming to Friday.
Yep.
That's happening too. And I don't know if that means more money for AEW. Dave Meltzer thinks it's significant. I've been told maybe it's not that significant. I don't know. And they're doing the quarterly shows too. I'm more ready to believe that those do represent an increase in compensation for AEW, because those are something that is in addition to what the original agreement was. An additional 1 hour show was in the initial agreement between AEW and Warner Media in January 2020. So there's that.
I guess, one of the things that I guess I was thinking of, and I feel like you had kind of hinted at this. I don't remember when you said it, but sort of just that placement too of where Rampage is going to be. I mean, it's going to follow the SmackDown audience at 10 Eastern. It is a later show compared to most shows that we're used to, but as you said, I mean, it's a 1 hour show. Tony Khan has specifically stated it's not going to be a B show. Like, it's going to be something that you tune in for every single week. That's kind of the way he's pushed it. And as you said, depending on the financial gain there overall, what do you think maybe just about the placement of, again, I know this is sort of different a question, but it is in an interesting slot at 10 Eastern on a Friday. I think a lot of people always talked about, with SmackDown being on Friday, it's the weekend and all these other things. But I guess it is different just in terms of, looking at it from that standpoint, although as we'll see, Dynamite's going to be on Fridays here coming up soon. So we'll have at least a reference point, and we've had some before on that. But I guess it's interesting just to sort of look at the time slot there too for that hour that they have. Although I'm sure if you look at it overall, I assume they probably didn't have a lot of options based on some of their other programming, as we've said, whether it's NBA, NHL, that kind of stuff. I assume that maybe there were things they didn't necessarily want to have going up against each other, and maybe it just felt like, Tony Khan's going to put that hour where he can, and maybe that was the best place to do it.
Right. So he won't run on Sunday because that's when football is.
Yep.
He doesn't ever want to compete with the NFL. He won't run on Monday. That's also the NFL's night. He's already on Wednesday. So I guess the options were Tuesday or Thursday back to back on nights with Dynamite, or Saturday, but nobody wants to be on the weekend. So Friday was probably the best choice among the nights available. And so then you got to think you're going to go head to head with SmackDown and probably get killed, or go before or after. And right after is probably the best choice. You get not exactly a lead in, but what people are calling a lead in from SmackDown, because people will be done watching SmackDown and they can get into the habit of tuning right into Rampage. I wonder too if we haven't seen any indication that they will yet, and I guess this show doesn't come out until August, so there's some time. Will WWE put something on Peacock to run head to head? Because it only makes sense, because you could advertise it on SmackDown and say, hey, tune into Peacock. Although, does Fox want WWE promoting an NBC Universal product on their TV show?
Right.
That's another question I hadn't thought of until I thought through it like that. But yeah, I think Rampage will be a secondary show to Dynamite. I know Tony Khan saying it's not going to be a B show, but I believe that the perception will be that Dynamite is the A show, and Rampage is the secondary show. It's the Thunder to its Nitro, I guess. Yeah.
It's a lot of programming, isn't it? I mean, that's something I know people have talked about, when you have dark elevation now too. I assume, and I've said this to many people as someone who does our AEW Dark review, like those shows at times hit 2 hours, sometimes 2.5 hours. But I think once they go back to live touring, you're not going to be having 16 to 18 matches on each of those nights and get a fill of 35 AEW matches on back-to-back nights based on the taping schedule. But I know that's sort of free for them in terms of YouTube and what they can bring in with that. So I think that's one of the things too that people have sort of pointed out, that you certainly don't want to. And I know that's one of the things Tony Khan mentioned was he did not. I mean, you could tell he was pretty much adamant that he did not want to do the third hour on Dynamite and make that a 3 hour show based on some of the reaction to Raw, sort of in that same sense. But I guess when you think about it now, you have the 2 hours of Dynamite, you have the hour on Fridays with Rampage, plus, I assume you're still going to have Dark Elevation and Dark, although to me, I'm starting to wonder, is there really the need for both? But hey, it's content and we're in the content era. So,
Yeah, I think so. Now there's 6 programs. Last I counted, and I don't know if that even includes MLW. Yeah, because there's what is there the Raw, NXT, Dynamite, Impact, SmackDown, Rampage, and that's not even including things like MLW, Ring of Honor, New Japan. So I think doing a third hour of Dynamite would be very bad for their brand. The fans, there'd be a backlash about that because nobody likes the fact that Raw is 3 hours. I think it would be more of a drain on the average rating of Dynamite than a separate 1 hour program would be. It's notable too. Rampage is going to be a tape show. It's not going to be a live show with the exception of the weeks that it is next to a pay-per-view. They will do it live then. At least at this point, that's the plan. If the right set of people decide they want to go live for some reason sometime in the future, or maybe the ratings are strong enough, maybe they will make it live. But it's much more expensive if they did 2 live tapings, separate tapings every week, than it is if they tied it into the Dynamite taping on Wednesday, which is what they're going to do for the most part. Dark Elevation, I don't think they've decided whether or not Dark and Dark Elevation are going to be taped in conjunction with the Dynamite tapings, or whether they're going to set up some sort of regular taping at Daly's Place. Daly's Place is operated by the Khan family, so they have control of it. So that's something I think that they're weighing within AEW right now. But I think, sort of as you alluded to, the days of the 15 match AEW Dark, I think that's going to be coming to an end once they do return to touring.
Yeah, and you would hope that, a lot of the talent, the unsigned talent that's been appearing on both of those shows will have more opportunities just outside of what has been available, certainly through the pandemic. We know the impact it's had on independent wrestling, of course, there. I guess before we wrap up, the big question is with Warner Media, I know sort of announced the merger with Discovery. Everyone wants to know: are we going to have Dinosaur Week with Jungle Boy and Luchasaurus, and are we going to have all these crossovers, or what impacts do you think, if any, there could be? Obviously, with this new, this move and everything going on, I assume there's not a whole lot probably to read into that at this point. So,
yeah, I mean, one of the values that any wrestling program can provide, or can not, have a lack of providing to its network, is how you're able to promote the other programs on the show. How much can you help the other programs get viewership as well? And we've seen that to some extent with AEW, with Cody appearing on the Go Big show, I think it's called, right?
yeah.
And Snoop Dogg as well, who's on that show, also having an appearance in AEW. Shaq in the Turner family having a match on AEW, pretty good match. But yeah, so if there's a way that they can cross promote the things that are in the Discovery family once that merger is complete, sure. I mean, who knows? You'll have Guy Fieri coming out and cutting a promo on somebody or something.
Yes.
But I think the other thing that it brings to mind is, what's going to be the ultimate destiny of HBO Max and Discovery Plus? Are they going to remain separate streaming services? Or are they going to be combined in some way? Do either of those eventually, someday, not anytime soon, but someday, become the streaming home for AEW, for its pay-per-view events, and for whatever library it has? I think that's probably something that happens down the road, because I think those streaming services can probably put a few dozen million in front of AEW, and it would greatly outweigh the U.S. revenue that AEW generates on pay-per-view. So I think that's something that will probably happen, and AEW will look to get done in the future.
Yep. We'll see what happens with that. I guess, but one more thing, Brent. I had seen this in one of your updates you had on WrestleNomics, and I had certainly I know it. I'm like, I think about it now and I'm like, well, duh, like I can see the impact, but it is pretty fascinating. I mean, we've sort of Impact Wrestling, we've all looked at as sort of, I mean, I don't know, they've been in an interesting spot, where they haven't had the opportunity to bring in fans and that kind of stuff throughout this pandemic. But I know I was looking at the ratings, and one of the things you brought up was, Dark Side of the Ring, since the season 3 premiere several weeks ago, it's had a little bit of an impact, certainly on Impact, no pun intended, just based on sort of the airing times with both of those two. And I know Impact trying to get all the momentum they can get right now. Of course, they're doing crossover stuff. Kenny Omega's the champion, and everything, but it still feels like Impact is in a spot where it's just, I don't know. It feels like it's still a bit of a struggle for them at this point. But again, as you said, because of Dark Side of the Ring, had even more competition now with that.
Yeah, I think so. Impact with Dark Side of the Ring, they overlap in the latter hour for Impact. So that's 9 p.m. Eastern. That's when Dark Side of the Ring starts, and it's competing with the second hour of Impact, and it is more highly viewed than an Impact is. Even the episodes that don't do as well. The Pillman episode did really well, and then it was followed by the Nick Gage episode that didn't do nearly the number that Pillman did, but still more than what Impact is doing. And I think it's just a matter of, Impact is a brand that, obviously, from when it was TNA several years ago, it's fallen a great deal, and I think it's starting to it has repaired itself somewhat in the last couple of years, but I think it's still sort of a mainstream product that doesn't have a great deal of differentiation. It's got kind of a niche audience, but it's kind of delivering a mainstream style of wrestling that I don't know that it strongly appeals to a specific audience. So I think they're going to be sort of where they're at, which is still a pretty valuable position for Access and for Anthem. It's the number one show on Access by, we don't, in the Showbiz Daily era, we never saw but one instance of another Access show up in the top 150. Now, granted, they were only showing up there. Access was only being reported by Showbiz Daily since December. But in those months, the only show, there was some sort of concert year in review or something. That was the one instance of anything but Impact showing up in the 150. So Impact's the biggest show for however small an audience it's got, usually under 200,000 viewers. As small as that sounds, that's like a tenth of the SmackDown or Raw audience. Nonetheless, it's still the strongest show for Access. And if you're trying to build a network and sell carriage fees for your network, that's a value to Anthem. So there's, I kind of think that Anthem's probably fine with where they are, and they see it as a worthwhile investment.
Yep, all about the value to your own network and not necessarily always comparing them with everyone else and what they're doing. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see, I guess, this Thursday when I know a lot of people will be tuning into the Dark Side of the Ring Ultimate Warrior episode based on probably wanting to compare and contrast to the WWE on A&E from this past Sunday. So that will be interesting to see what that looks like. But Brandon, I know it's been a busy day. Like you said, there's lots going on, lots happening really over the past 2 weeks now in wrestling. Lots of noteworthy news items when it comes to the business side of wrestling. And I know you guys have it all covered over at WrestleNomics.com, and you guys have a Patreon, which I am now a proud member of. There is just so much, I think, great analysis, a lot of great resources in there. One of the things that I had kind of got lost in for hours was the Google Trends report on what people are really trying to find when it comes to the WWE, AEW, and such. So let everybody know where they can find all that. And as I said, I just think there's so much fascinating information there for people that really do enjoy the business side of wrestling.
Yeah, thanks. I'm thinking about doing that on a recurring basis. I'm still sort of working out the script that I needed to write in order to scrape all that info from Google Trends. But yeah, everybody can get access to all of our content on Patreon at patreon.com/WrestleNomics. It's just $5 a month, which includes access to the WrestleNomics viewership spreadsheet, which will include all of the wrestling viewership data that I can get my hands on in this new Wild West world that we're about to enter here post Showbiz Daily. So perhaps as valuable as ever to get access to that is a Google spreadsheet with over 15,000 data points in it and a number of tabs that I've put together, sort of analyzing the data in a number of ways. I just put out a report today on the layoffs at WWE. And yeah, I'm really just starting to figure out what exactly is the content promise, but it's definitely those things. There's a locked poster to just about every week, and there's also more of my written work for free on WrestleNomics.com, a number of wrestling stats for free on WrestleNomics.com, and I have a podcast that comes out every week. We're really just like at this point, a three-person team. I've just worked to get somebody to help me to create some articles for WrestleNomics.com. But along with Chris Gullo, I host the WrestleNomics Radio podcast, which you can find on your podcast app. Just search for WrestleNomics. And you can follow me on Twitter at Brandon Thurston and the WrestleNomics account at WrestleNomics.
Yeah, check it all out. We'll put the links to everything in the show notes here of the podcast. And yeah, as I said, lots of great stuff if you enjoy the business side of wrestling. But Brandon, this was a great discussion. Thanks so much for doing it. And I'm sure we'll catch up again soon. And hopefully you will not stay too busy with everything going on. And as I said, do not put your graphic on AEW Dynamite. I don't want WrestleNomics to go down. So.
Well, they've already taken Chris Harrington away from us, so they've got the fill.
That's right. That's Brandon Thurston. Again, everyone, check out stuff at WrestleNomics.com, and of course, head over to 411mania.com. Check out everything we got going on over there. We have everything covered from the latest round of layoffs, as we discussed, and everything else, news, columns. We're actually hiring columnists. If you're interested in joining the site as a columnist, you can apply there and get all the information you need on that. So check everything out. 411mania.com. Subscribe to the podcast, 411 on Wrestling, any podcast app you use. And thanks again to Brandon Thurston for joining me here on the podcast. And thank you as always for listening. We'll talk to you next time here on the 411 on Wrestling podcast.